So is everyone here new to Blender, or have you been using it before? Everyone pretty new, yeah? Right. So what is a Blender? Blender is an open source, multi-platform 3D content creation application. It allows modeling, texturing, rendering, rigging, animation, effects, compositing, video editing, and all kinds of lovely things. Everything you learn with Blender will carry over to other 3D programs and other types of animation if you do like animation and get into it. Once you download Blender, it belongs to you, and everything you make with it that's original is yours to do with what you want. And it's free, obviously, you know that. It's created by the Blender Foundation, and it's completely open source, so you can access the code of it and do whatever you want with it. And feel free to donate at any point if you're using it full time with your work. So, this is the guy that made Blender. This is Ton Roosendaal. He co-founded a Dutch animation studio called Neo Geo, and in 1995 he decided that the program they're using wasn't very good, so he decided to rewrite it, and that became Blender. And it became apparent to Ton that other people could benefit from Blender, not just them. So they founded the non-profit organization Blender Foundation in 2002, and the goal was to continue developing the program and offer it up to people for free. He's a good guy. The free Blender campaign sought to raise 100,000 so that the foundation could buy the rights to the Blender source code back from all the investors that were involved in it, and to release it to the open source community. And that worked out great. They reached the goal in 7 short weeks, and on Sunday, October 13th, 2002, Blender was released to the world, and the development continues today led by Ton Roosendaal, but now everyone kind of joins together and tries to help develop it, so it's got thousands of people working on it, and other programs, they just can't really compete anymore. So our course is going to be a complete introduction to Blender, but with a Minecraft kind of a theme. We're going to bring in all the blocks, all the characters, the rigs, everything, and we're also going to import our Minecraft worlds. If you do have Minecraft and you want to pick out a part of it that we're going to import, we'll probably do that maybe next week or something like that. Yeah, so we're going to bring in our worlds like that, and then we're going to work on the actual textures of them and make them look nice and shiny and so on, and do all the lighting, and then we're going to do a short kind of an animation, and we might do some kind of an underwater scene, but still in a Blender kind of a style. And we're going to create some kind of water as well. This is just a little test I done. We'll make it look a little better than that. So week 1, we're going to go over the interface in depth and generally how we work in 3D. We're hopefully going to get through navigating in 3D space and moving objects and rotating them and all that kind of stuff. Does everyone have a 3D button mouse now at this point? Is there anyone that doesn't? Great. And Daniel and Julie are here to help. If you get stuck in anything or whatever, the 2 of them can give you a hand, and I'll help, of course, maybe. So keep a notepad ready if you want for shortcuts and just taking notes, obviously, for a notepad. The class is being recorded on my computer, so I will hopefully upload this later on this evening, so if you missed bits or you fell asleep or something, you can carry on later and sort that out. Welcome! So yeah, just when you open up Blender, try and close down any other programs you have running, just because Blender will be fairly heavy on your computer. And when you're working in 3D, you normally have your left hand on your keyboard and the right hand on the mouse, or the other way around, whatever. Yeah. Right, so if everyone wants to go ahead and open Blender, the out of control. Right, when you do first open Blender, there's a lot of buttons all over the place. It can be quite scary, but it's super not scary. And I'm going to go through it now and just give you a general idea of how it all goes. The first thing you might want to do is in the very top left corner, if you've made any adjustments or changes and maybe your Blender isn't looking like this at the moment, if you want, you can go down to load factory settings up in file there, and that'll reset Blender all the way back to the way it was before you kind of messed it up. So if I went like this and went like this and went like this, now it's getting very messy, so you can just reset all that. Right, so I'm going to start off at the very top, and we're going to work our way clockwise around the interface. So I'm going to start up with this bar across here and then work our way down. So right, so all the way across the top. Excuse my wobbly pen here. So this bar all the way across the top here is called the info editor. This default scene that you open in Blender, it starts with 5 editors, and all these editors can be swapped out and all that kind of shenanigans. So this is general, it gives us information about the scene and the objects in it and stuff like that. So if I just move my little pen, right, so I'll start up here in the very left. You'll see there's this little square button. I'm just gonna skip over that for now. We'll come back to it, but just take note that there's a little square button there that does something. So yeah. Yeah, it took me a while to find it myself. We're only just getting started anyway, so. Do you have Blender installed? Do you have the program installed? Okay. Julie and Daniel here will help get you set up. Hey? I don't think so. There we go. How's that computer coming along? Alrighty. Right, so this bar across the top, it looks like in most programs what they call a header. It's a bar going across the top, but this is actually a complete window all by itself. If you just grab the little bar below it and slide it down, you'll see it actually opens up a full window up there. So we don't really need to worry about the contents of this, but this is basically kind of like looking into Blender's brain and letting you see the kind of code that's going on behind it. So if I was to do something in my viewport, move an object, you'll see up at the top there it starts to fill up with all the kind of Python code. So anything we do it'll start to fill it up there. So when you get into Python and stuff, you can go in there and do loads of edits and such. So we'll start up here in the very left, file. So this generally has things in here that we're used to. We can open a new file, we can open the recent. If Blender crashed, we can recover our last session or autosave. Then we have save as, general, just save and open and close and stuff. User preferences, that's where we're going to go now, and we're going to customize Blender a little bit. So if you go to File, User Preferences, and that'll open up a new editor. And in here we have all kinds of shenanigans. So again, we're going to start on the very left in the top corner. I'm going to click on interface, and there's a few little shortcuts that will kind of help with Blender, make it a bit easier to use. So what do we have here? Right, so under interface, switch on our marker, we have auto perspective here in the middle. These are things I will explain what they're doing as we come across them in the actual program. So auto perspective is one that we should switch on. Now we'll go over to the next tab, editing, and in here, release confirms. This basically means when we move an object, once we let go of the button, the object will stay there. If you don't have this switched on, it kind of stays stuck to your mouse like there's glue on it, and you have to click again to place an object. So these are just little things that are very common in other 3D programs, and once we switch these on, this makes Blender very intuitive. Transform. Oh yeah, and we have undo over here as well. You can set this to whatever you want. I have it set up to the max, which is 256, so it means we can reverse 256 times. Click, click, click. So you can set that to whatever you want. I like to have it as much as possible. Just know it might use up more power on your computer and stuff. Yeah. Oh yeah, you can actually, I can hear you clicking, you can tap right on that number, click on it once, and then you can actually type in whatever number you want. But I think it only goes as far as 256. If I try and put in 1,000, no, it just stays at 256. That was just a recent update. I think Blender only had like 50 or 60 update or undos till recently. So that's under editing. Yeah. So the next one now we're going to go to is input up the top. And in here, right, so we all have a 3D, or we all have a 3-button mouse. If we didn't, this is where we would switch on to try and emulate one. But it's very messy. When you're working in 3D, you definitely need a 3-button mouse. It's nearly impossible to work without one because we use that to move our camera through the program at all times. So yeah. So underneath that we have continuous grab. Just right here. So switch that on. What that means is when we grab an object and we move it, if we actually, I'll just demonstrate that real quick. So if I switch off continuous grab, and I'll just hide this. So now if I grab my object and move, oh no, I haven't saved my settings. So if I grab my object and move, well, it's supposed to stop. Basically it means when we get to the corner here of our viewport, we won't be able to move it any further. But with continuous grab on, we can just move it infinitely. So continuous grab there, we'll switch that on. Under that, we have select with. I'm going to put this on left. In most programs, any program you've used ever really, your left click is going to be like your main select or paint or whatever. In Blender it's the opposite way around, which is totally weird and it doesn't work at all. It just is quite strange when you use it. It doesn't quite make sense. So if we switch that to left, then in our viewport here, when we click with the left button, we're selecting objects. Your right click is going to make this little sniper crosshair appear. We'll chat about that in a moment. Um, oh yeah, so does everyone have a numpad? So it's an actual separate numpad to the right of your, right, there's a few that do, a few that don't. You've got numpads? Don't, great. Right, so the numpad is used heavily in Blender to switch between different cameras and views and stuff. So what I would suggest if you are getting into 3D and enjoying it is to pick up an external keyboard which has a numpad on it. You can also buy just little numpads on their own, but you might as well just get it a full keyboard, because then you can leave your laptop back in your desk and just walk down to the shops with this, whatever you want to do. So yeah, the numpad. So where are we? Oh yeah, so we've select with left, and then underneath that we've got a little button, emulate numpad. This here. What this is going to do is your number buttons across the top of your keyboard. Quiet you. It's going to. Okay, keyboard. Keyboard wants attention. Yeah, so I'll try not to press that again. So, the numpad over here is used heavily. So what it's going to do when you switch on emulate numpad is going to switch these buttons all the way across here. So now you're 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9. These buttons are going to do the exact same thing. This makes more sense when you're using it down here, what it'll do for, you know, today or for the class or whatever. But we'll get onto the numpad shortly, and it'll all kind of make a bit more sense. Right, so we have. Yep, that's fine. Turntable. Oh yeah, underneath that turntable, orbit style. This one here. So basically, as we're going around in our viewport, we'll talk about actually doing this. But the middle mouse button on your mouse will rotate your view if you just click down on it and then slide it around. If you you'll notice as I slide mine around, my camera is kind of staying face up, and if you have that on trackball, it's going to do this really weird kind of wobbly thingy, which I find a little weird. Maybe some of you might like that. It's up to you to kind of try it out, see which one works for you. But that one's just totally weird to me. So so I leave that on turntable, the orbit style. The rest of the things are pretty much fine there. They're not going to worry. We're not going to worry about those. Add-ons. Yeah, we'll come back to that. So that's pretty much kind of. Oh yeah, we could go to themes as well. Actually, the fifth one over, and over here on the left on presets, you can choose all the different colors and whatnot. There's a load of different looks for Blender. I forget which one I'm looking at now, but it's in there somewhere. It's just kind of a dark. If I switch that back to black, that might be near. Is that kind of what it looks like on your screen? Is it kind of white, is it? Mostly. You can choose whatever you want there anyway. Blender is 100% customizable. You can change absolutely everything you want in it. So you can kind of pick whatever suits you as you're working and stuff. Yeah, next to that we have file. This deals with just all kind of file things. We can set up our paths for like fonts and textures. So if we could, for example, tell Blender where our Windows fonts are on our computer, so that when we start bringing fonts into Blender, it'll look straight there. Also, where is it? Image editor. So if we had Photoshop or GIMP or something, we could link it to Blender here, So when we render out a picture or something, it'll automatically go over to Photoshop or GIMP and you can start working on it there. And the only thing really here would be the autosave down here. You can switch this on or off, so it'll autosave every 10 minutes or so. Programs crash sometimes, and generally I prefer to have my autosave turned off. I don't like, as I'm working, suddenly the computer to go, hold on, I'm saving, and I might have been doing something. So what I'd always do is just save all the time. Save all the time, every time. Yeah, save all the time. So finally then we have system. The first setting over here is general DPI. This is the dots per inch. So as we slide this, you'll see Blender starts to magnify. You can grab onto any of these numbered values. You can click it, or you can grab and slide, do whatever you want. So I think I've mine about 70, maybe 80. Yeah. So again, that's totally up to you guys. You can change the zoom whatever you want. Oh yeah. So, and also your mouse wheel, when you're in these menus, if there's more to the menu, you can slide, or you can grab the bar to the right. So the last thing in here would be compute device. So if you've got a relatively good laptop or whatever, if you're aware that you purchased a good one with a graphics card, this is where you switch that on. The 3D programs, they'll use two different things. They'll either use your graphics card to try and make everything run smoothly, or they'll use your processor on your computer. Graphics cards are generally much faster, so you might have an NVIDIA GeForce or something like that there. So compute device, if you don't see anything there in the list, then maybe you just don't have a graphics card, so you'll just have to run it on your processor, which should be fine. But if you do have like a GeForce card or an AMD, you'll see that in here. Does anyone see in their graphics card pop up there? Anyone got a graphics card going? Yeah? Cool. So you just select that in there. I've got a GeForce 840M. It's not the best, but it's pretty good. Yeah, it's fine. And that is kind of most of the customizations I'm going to do here. Before we close up our user preferences, you want to go down to the very bottom and click Save User Settings, and that will save everything you've done. So the next time that you open Blender, it will open up with those customizations. Yeah. Any questions there? Anyone stuck on the preferences or happy out? Feel free to ask any questions about what we're up to. So that is the user preferences. So I'm back out now in the main window and back up here on the info editor. So file, so we were just in the user preferences. So we've got load factory settings, which I've told you about. The rest of these then are all about importing files, linking files, stuff like that. We're not going to do this just now, but we will later in the course. We also have import and export, so we can import stuff from 3D printers or from the internet if you just download stuff, whatever. This is where we bring them in as well. And then export, we can export stuff out to whatever. If we want to bring it into another 3D program, or we want to bring it into a game engine or something, Unreal Engine or Unity or whatever. Yeah, so the rest of that's fine. And then of course we can close Blender, the bottom there, by quit. Now, so that's file. Next to that we have render. So render means to basically build an image out of what we've done. So say like in this viewport here, this is our scene, and we want to print that now to like a video or an image. So up here in the file, we could click render image, and when you do that, your screen changes into an image editor. And now if anyone followed along with that, you press F11 to close that window that just popped up. So what we just saw there was a rendered shot through this here. This is our camera. This should be in your scene as well. Every default scene in Blender starts with a cube, camera, and a light. So when we're up here and we hit render, we can just see the top of that box there because it's just in the camera view. F11 to close that again. So we could render animation. I'm not going to do that now because it'll start rendering out loads of frames and take forever. Then we have OpenGL rendering, which means it's not going to apply all the nice lights and effects and everything to our scene. It's just going to more or less make an image look exactly like what we see in our viewport there. So it's just a very rough, mainly for testing out animations and stuff like that, just to get an idea what's going on. After that we have window. We can make any window full screen in Blender by, you can see the shortcut there is, oh no, this is to make the full program full screen. So if I click that, now your program will take over so you don't see the window under there. The shortcut for that is Alt F11. So Alt F11 and Alt F11 will minimize and that. The other thing in here is save screenshot. This might be handy for you guys if you are working on something and you just want to take a quick screenshot of your entire screen. If you're maybe stuck on something after the class or whatever, this would be a handy way to let me see what your problem is. So what you would do you would come in here, click save screenshot, and then this brings up the file browser, so you could pick wherever you want to put that picture. I'm just going to scroll down, stick it on my desktop, and I'll say big problem, just save it as that. So now if I go back to my desktop, you see now I have an actual image of that. So if you guys were stuck on a certain thing, you could email me during the week, and you could also take a picture of what you're doing, and that could be helpful. It's also just cool to take a picture of it and have it to send to people and whatnot. So I have 2 blenders open. Another great thing about Blender, you can have loads of blenders open and it doesn't seem to kill your computer, but yeah. So that was in window, and then help, that'll give us all our help shenanigans. You can open up the manual, it'll bring you to the website, the shop, user community. Blender has a massive user community, and it's probably the most active community, comparing that to like other 3D programs and stuff. If you ask someone a question on a Blender forum, you're usually going to start getting answers chucked at you all over the place. Some useful, some not so useful. And under help, finally the very bottom thing is the splash screen. That's the little screen that opens when you first open Blender, and that just gives you information about the version, and you can open up your recent files and so on. You could also here on your splash screen, under interaction, you could set up your own shortcuts and all that kind of stuff. If you were used to another 3D program, you could switch that over to one of them here, and the shortcuts will be similar to that program. But I find the Blender, the shortcuts work quite well. So that's the 4 little tabs here. And right, so I'll just move on to this now. This is the screen layout. So at the moment we're looking at the default one, and I mentioned there's 5 editors in it. We could swap out all these editors for something else that we want to do. So if we're doing animation, we can click on this and suddenly you've got a whole pile of new windows. Don't worry about them, they'll be fine. You'll all understand them at the end. But so if we're doing video editing, it opens up a video editor, and now we can start adding video, audio, all that kind of stuff. There's the game engine as well. Blender has a game engine built into it, which is pretty cool. So there's loads of stuff, but we're just going to stay on the default for now because it's scary enough all by itself. And you can make your own layouts and save them. So maybe if I wanted that to be like that or whatever, I could set it up and then click plus, and this will add a new screen to it. Then you could rename that whatever you want. So that's the scene layout. Following that, actually I should have marked that. So that's that there. That's the scene layout. Next over here, this is to choose the actual active scene. So right now our scene is what we see here. We have a camera, a block, and a light. Blender can hold many different scenes. So maybe one of them will have could be car driving down the street, and then we open up a new scene, and on that scene we're going to work on maybe the car crashes at a corner or whatever, and so we can split it up just to kind of tidy up our, instead of having everything in one big file. But we're not going to worry about the scenes for now. It's just as there if you want. Next to that, go away there. Next to that we have the render engine. So there's two different types of render engine in Blender. A render engine is basically, it's almost like the kind of camera that you use. So yeah, so the Blender render, that's kind of like, we'll say it's a low quality one. It's not very accurate. It doesn't, lights and materials and stuff, they don't act in a realistic way. They're just like a computer kind of idea of how it should work. And then under that, well, we have the game engine as well, but the two that we use for rendering is Blender render or the cycles render. So the cycles render, it's a physically based render engine, which means lights and stuff will act realistically like they do in the real world. If you've ever heard of Pixar, maybe, they use a render engine called RenderMan, and they've made that available now for non-commercial use, and that too is a physically based render engine. So it just means that when we bring in lights and stuff like that, they're going to shadow properly, they're going to just generally look way better. Light will actually bounce, and it'll bounce against walls and bounce all over the place like it does in real life. And that is the render engine we're going to use later on in this course to make our Minecraft stuff look super duper awesome. So I'll just leave that on Blender render for now. A lot of the options in Blender will change depending on which render engine's being used. So we'll just leave it on that for now, but you can switch it over to a game engine and you can start working on stuff there. And then right after that, now you see if you middle mouse and click with your middle mouse button and slide, you can actually slide these menus around if you're having trouble seeing what's on the screen. Maybe your screen's a little smaller or whatever, maybe you've got the whole thing magnified. So this will work for a lot of menus. So basically we have the little Blender icon there. If we click on that, it just brings up the splash screen again. Following that, we have the version, and then after that we have a load of different information which is relating to the objects and whatnot. So you see faces 6, tries 12, triangles, and then objects 1 out of 3. That means I've selected. So if you select that, 1 out of 3, select this one, now I've got 2 out of 3, so on. But we'll worry about that later. You'll also see the amount of memory you're using. Just here, so that can be one to keep an eye on just as you're working in Blender. It'll depend a lot on what RAM you have in your computer, but for what we're doing here it shouldn't be too big of a problem. But when we do import our Minecraft worlds, things might get a little hectic depending on how much you take in, how much detail it can handle. So that's basically the info editor across the top there. Are there any questions on just that bar up the top?
Everyone happy enough so far? Yep. Okay. So now I'm going to go clockwise to this menu here. So this is the outliner. Actually, we should have done that. So yeah, this is the outliner. It allows us to view objects in the scene, select and deselect objects in the scene, hide or show objects from the viewport, enable or disable selection of objects, and we can delete objects and all that kind of shenanigans. So again, across the top, the header here, we can middle mouse button and slide it if you need to see it all. But this just relates to making the list in certain orders alphabetically and so on. We can search for objects and we can choose which scene. Now, with any editor, again, you can grab the edges and you can reshape, resize any of these. So I'm just gonna slide that a little bit that way and just grab it here and slide it down a little bit just so we can see it a little bit clearer. So, the default scene in Blender, at the very top we see scene. That's just containing everything that's in the world. And under that we've render layers. We'll skip that now and come back to it. So the three objects that are in our default scene, we have camera, cube, and lamp. Those come in with the default scene, and we can select them by right or left clicking. Now that is if you've switched the click to left like I did in user preferences. So if you haven't done that, if you prefer to use the right click, just keep in mind whenever I'm saying left clicking, you should be right clicking. But hopefully you're left clicking. This is just that's crazy. So we can left click on an object to select it. You'll see in the viewport you'll get this little green, blue, and red little. It's called a manipulator. So as we click on them here, that swaps around and it'll be kind of highlighted in an orange way. We can hold Shift and then click on another object, and now we can start to select multiple objects. So you can select camera, cube, and lamp. If you then select or click on one you've already selected, it'll deselect it, which is great. We can double click on an object and you'll get a little title change there, so we can switch in my super cool camera if that's what you've made. We click on the lamp and change that to whatever. And we can right click on an object and we'll get this little menu, which we're not going to worry about now, but it's got a lot of advanced options there, deleting, toggling visibility, so on. Yeah, also while you have an object selected there, you can just hit delete on your keyboard and that will delete that out. Yeah, so we've got our cube, lamp, and super cool camera. Beside each of these objects, you'll see a little kind of an icon. Beside mesh objects, you're going to see a triangle. That means it's a polygon object and it can be changed, adjusted. Beside lamps, you're going to see a bulb. And beside cameras, you're going to see a little picture of a camera. So different objects have different. If I quickly add in, ignore what I'm doing here. If I add a curve, you see now I get a new object up here called Bezier curve, and you'll see there's a little kind of a line. These are basically just 3D lines, but yeah, we'll worry about that again. So up here with these icons, if we click on, let's say I'll click on the lamp, and I'm going to drag it out to the viewport, you'll see now I'm dragging in a new copy of that object. So we see we get a little dialog, add named object. When I let go, now we've got a brand new lamp. So we've got this lamp and this lamp. So we've got our cube here. So if I, again in the outliner, grab the triangle, drag that down, we get a brand new cube. And each one is just going to be named the exact same thing, but with 001, 002, so on and so forth. So that's a pretty handy way of kind of like duplicating objects and stuff. Also, another thing we can do in the outliner here is to parent objects. So in 3D, parenting is basically a way of creating a relationship between two objects where one of them will be in control of both of their movements. It's kind of like hooking a trailer onto a car or whatever. Wherever the car goes, the trailer is going to follow. But the trailer then can kind of wobble wherever it wants to. So we can actually do that with these icons here. So what I'm going to do is just move this up here. No, I'll just delete this. Right, so we've got a cube here. So I'm just going to drag down from the triangle, just drag in a new cube. Now it's just sitting over there. So to parent an object or link it, you basically select the object that you want to be the child object. So let's say I grab my cube 001. So I'm going to click on the icon, and the same way you drag into the viewport, I'm going to still hold on to this, I'm not going to let it go. So if I drag it into the viewport, it's going to create a copy, but if we drag it up onto another object, you'll see it says drop to set parent. So that means whatever object we drop this on, the object is going to become the parent. So let's just say now I drop it on cube, yeah, just the cube there. So it says drop to set parent. I let that go, and now our object disappears. But you see there's a little plus icon. If we click on that, you'll see our cube is kind of, it's like in a container. So now what'll happen if in the viewport here, you'll also see there's a little dashed line between the two. That's letting you know there's a connection between them. So now, if I grab this one and move it, you'll see the two of them go along together. So what we've done is we've parented this object to this one. So this object is a child object, and this is the parent. So the child object, we can move that wherever we want, and then when we move the parent, it drags the other one with it. So that's kind of how that works. It's a little bit advanced, but it's just very cool that you can actually do that up here in the outliner just by grabbing the little icon. So if I wanted now, I could grab say this object. So when I move this, it drags that child along. So now let's make this one a child of, just say, the lamp, just for the funsies. So if I grab that cube, select its the little icon, and I drag it, so now again I could make a new copy, but if I drop it onto an object here, it's going to become the child of it. So I'll just drop it on lamp. I love lamp. And now we see a little dotted line just appeared there again. So now this lamp should control both of them, because this is the parent of this one, and this is the parent of this one. So we can move this child around, we can move this child around, and it'll move that one with it, and this is in control of it. So that's kind of a little bit of how we parent and so on. Any questions on that? Am I happy enough? Great. So finally, in the outliner here, over to the, just over here in the very right, we have a little eyeball, an arrow, and a little camera. This is controlling the visibility of the objects and the selectability. So I'm actually going to just reset my scene now. So now I'm back to a brand new scene. So we've got our cube, our light, and our camera. So over here in the outliner, let's say I'll select my cube. So over to the right of that, if I toggle the little eyeball, you'll see the cube disappears from the viewport. It still exists, and it will still render when we render out through our camera, but it's just we don't see it in the viewport. So this is very handy if maybe we've got a forest, we could have thousands of trees or whatever, or you could have an army fighting another army or whatever, and as it's playing, it's just killing our computer. So maybe we need to take, say, a load to the background or whatever, just hide it all together. But when we render, it will appear in the final shot. So we have the little eyeball there for the cube to make it appear and disappear in the viewport. Following that, we have a little arrow. This controls the selectability. So right now, if I click on it in the viewport, you'll see I can get it and I can move it around. If I switch off that little arrow, now I cannot click on it in the viewport at all. So it's like frozen there, so it just kind of keeps it safe. I'll switch that back on. And then finally, the restrict rendering. So this just means it won't be in the final shot. So if I turn off that camera, you'll see it kind of fades. So now if I come up to my info editor and render image, so remember this is going to take a picture through this camera of what's in front of it. So I'll render image, and you see we don't see anything because the block is it's hidden from the render. If you've followed along there, F11 will close that again. F12 is going to fire up a render, and then F11 is going to close that render from that camera. So at any point, you can move this and go, oh yeah, it's still hidden. So if I come over to my cube, switch on render, see my cube is there now, fully rendered. Move it around. So yeah, that's how we just print out a kind of final animation. Yeah, so we can do that for all the objects. Also, we can click on them like that, or we can click and drag over multiple, and you'll see as you do that, they'll all start to close. So you see the top one eye is closed there. If I click and still holding down, drag down, and now they all start to appear. So it's a rather schlick kind of a way. So you can hide whatever you want and so on. And yeah, so we can delete objects and all that kind of stuff. Also, if we had a big massive list of objects here, which we will when we open the Blender stuff, you'll have a big massive list here of all the different blocks. We can also drag between two different outliners. So if I had, let's see. Now I've got two outliners because I just swapped this out. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So I could drag this camera up into this one and set it, as a parent there, or do whatever we want. So it's just handy to know. Properties. I think that's mostly all on the outliner. Any questions there? Everyone happy enough? Okay. Slowly but surely we're chugging away through the big old interface. Right. So, look, that's the outliner there. Below that is the properties editor. This is where a lot of work is going to happen. You can kind of access almost everything in Blender through here. So again, if you want, you could slide that out just so you can see it a bit clearer. If you don't have that space and it's like squashed in like this, again, you can hold the middle mouse button to slide those tabs across on the top. But I've got loads of space here, so I'll just leave that like that. So again, we have this little button here that swaps out the editors. And then we've got all these tabs across here. They all correspond to something separate and different. When they're orange, that means you've selected them. So these are the tabs, and underneath them then we've got all these little panels. You see with the little triangle. We can close these, just click on the name. Or we can also, the same thing with the eyeballs up here, where we click and drag. We can click and then just drag down, and it'll just start to close them all one by one. And we can do the same thing if I click on it and open, still holding the button down and slide down, they'll all just start to pop open. So I'll slide them all closed. So if I click the second tab there, The panels are the ones I'm just pointing the mouse at there, the little triangles. These little triangles here. Everywhere you see one of those, that is a panel, so that can be minimized and all that. So the properties editor, it lets us edit data and properties for the active scene and active object, change render settings, create and control constraints between objects, create and control modifiers on objects, create and adjust materials and textures, create particle effects, and control the physics of our scene. So there is a huge amount of stuff in here. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I will just take a little dip and just give you a wee example of some of the stuff. So the very first tab we have here, this one here, is a little camera. So this controls everything to do with rendering. So I have all these panels closed now, so just to make it a bit easier on the eyes. So the first one we have there is render. So again, it's the exact same as click and render up here in the info editor. We can render animation, audio. I'll close that again. The next one is dimensions. So this will change the actual size and resolution of your render. So we've got some presets there. You can mess around, choose kind of whatever you want. It depends on what you're making video for. Yeah, we've got the 1080p, the 720p's, and you got your old TV shenanigans. So at the moment now, resolution there, that's set to 1920 by 1080, which is 1080p, super HD, super shiny. And just below that, we have a little percentage marker. What that means is it's going to render 50% of the resolution up here. So if I hit render there, this is an image that's been created, but it's actually only half the size of the normal HD image. So what we'd want to do here is, let's say we're working on our object and stuff. I'd normally leave this, quite low, because rendering takes quite a while to do. Sometimes for one single frame, it can take 20 minutes to half an hour, and depending on some of the films you saw earlier there, it would be rendering all night kind of thing for one frame. Let me see. Just gonna try and find one of my yeah, it helps to organize your files, but I don't do that. Maybe that one? No. Nope. Nope. Yes. Right, so this is just a render I done just a couple of nights ago in Blender. You see up in the top corner here, well, it might be a little bit hard to see, but so that render time, that took 20 minutes to render. That's because I've got a lot of global lighting and stuff going on here. I've switched all these to actual proper lights, and you'll see on the walls there, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see there's kind of little bumps and whatnot in the actual pixels. That's because I've kind of reworked the materials to look a little bit shinier than in the game. So an image like that, it'll just depend a lot on what you're doing. So just take note here, we can actually add this little information onto our render for when we're finished, just so we know all the information about it. So yeah, resolution 1920 by 1080. When we're finished and we're like, right, now we want to print the final frame, we stick that up to 100%, and now we're getting our full 1920. But as you're working on a file, you might even stick that down to 10%. And if I hit that, see now I get a teeny tiny picture. 50%, and it's a little bit bigger, and then finally 100%. You see it kind of actually took just a second longer there. You can see the time when we hit a render, that just took 1 second, and so on. So yeah, that's the resolution. So yeah, just play around with that, decide for yourself. If you're doing stuff for like YouTube and whatnot, leave that at 1080, and should look quite nice. Under that we have the aspect ratio. I won't worry about that just now. We have the frame range. This is for when we're doing animations. We'll worry about that later. Frame rate. Whole bunch of shenanigans there. So that's all. Oh yeah, actually, still under the render tab, under metadata. If we click on that, that's the little text file we saw on that image I just showed you. So if you click stamp output, now when we hit render, up here in the top you'll see you get a, if you can find it, yeah, we get a little just the date and how long that took. So that took 1.25 seconds. And all these little panels in here, they can actually, you can grab them and slide them around. If you grab the little kind of, it's like a little dotted block just there to the very right. If you grab that, you could rearrange these whatever you want, whichever way you want. But I'm just going to leave it the way it is for now. Very customizable. Right, so that's the render tab. Next to that we've render layers. I'm going to skip this again. This just means you can, when you're rendering an image, you can render things out separately. So for example, if you had, let's say, a car driving out of a building, you could have the building on one separate layer completely, and then the car on its own layer, so you don't have to render the whole thing at the same time. So it might be easier for you to take a picture of the building and then render out the car separately. So we'll worry about that in a later class. Scene data, this is general. We can choose which camera is active if we have more than one. At the moment I just have just the one. We can change background and stuff. I'm just going to close all these again by sliding down. Units, we can set up the actual units used in Blender. So this would be for if we're doing 3D printing, or generally just we want to keep to real sizes. That's what we would stick it to. You can stick the metric or whatever you want there, but again we'll cover that in another class. The rest of this, I'm not going to worry too much about it. We can switch on, change gravity and such for the scene. We'll get into physics later. So the fourth tab over is world. World is basically, it controls the sky in our scene, controls the environmental lighting and ambient occlusion, all kind of fancy words and stuff for making the scene look nice. So things like mist and fog and how light reacts in corners and shadows and stuff like that. But again, not going to worry about this. The objects. So again, these tabs here, the properties editor is going to change depending on what object is selected and kind of what we're doing. So at the moment I have a cube selected. So in here I have object properties. We can do things like, we can change the X, change the Y, change the Z, and we can do the same for rotation and scale. We could change the size of that, but we can access these in a better way, so this is just kind of more information really. Display, I'm just gone down a few here, just skimming over some of them. Display, we can switch on the name of the cube. So you see in our viewport here it says cube. We can switch on all kinds of different things just to help out. If we switch on wire, now we can actually see the wire along the object. If I switch that off. And X-ray, we can switch on X-ray so we can actually see straight through the object. This is handy when we're building rigs, character rigs and stuff like that. Yep, that's kind of all I want to talk about there, but So that's because I have this object selected. If I select this light, you see these tabs here change, and if I select this camera, you see they kind of change and adjust. So following that, we have a little two little chains kind of stuck together. This is for setting up object constraints. A constraint is a way of affecting an object by using another object. So for example, we could have two boxes here, and we could make one copy the other's rotation. So when I come in here and start rotating this one will do the exact same rotation, or we could have it do a reverse rotation, or we could do anything. Another type of constraint is a path constraint, which is where we'll create a 3D line in the viewport, and then we actually connect the object to that line. So that would be called a constraint. So it's where an object is controlling another object's movements and stuff like that. And we will be doing a path animation later on in the course. Hopefully we'll do like an ocean, and then we'll have a Steve in a boat, or whoever you want in a boat, and we're going to have them going along the ocean, and they'll be following a path. So that should be grooving. Yeah, loads of constraints in there, but I'm not going to get into them now. Following that, we have a little wrench icon. This is for our modifiers. Modifiers are like effects. Like if you've ever seen someone play guitar or whatever, if you play guitar yourself and you've got effect pedals, if you have like distortion, you switch it on, it affects the sound. And if we connect another pedal after that, say like a delay or something, they'll all get affected and they'll all affect each other. So this is exactly how modifiers work. So under that wrench icon there, modifier, we have a whole pile of different effects. We're not going to cover all of them, but let me see, what could I throw in here? So bevel. Yeah, we've these different types: modify, then generate, deform, and then simulate. So if I throw on a bevel modifier, for example, a bevel will kind of round out the edges of an object. Once we do that, you don't need to follow along with this now, I'm just roughly, we'll do a whole class of modifiers again. So when we add a modifier, we can change the different settings. I can change the segments that the bevel has, and we can change the profile, so we can like bend it in, bend it out, and we can control the material that's applied to that and stuff. So very quickly, if we were doing like some kind of a door or something, you know, that's a very handy way to kind of do that. Another modifier. Let's see, I'll show you one more. I'm just going to delete this object, bring in a cone, and zoom into this. Right, I'm looking for build. So build is another modifier. We click that and our object disappears, which doesn't seem too great. But if I hit play, you'll see now it starts to rebuild our object, polygon by polygon. I'll just rewind that back again. This is very handy for showing off objects you're working on and stuff. In the build modifier, we can randomize. So now if I go back, it'll just start to build the faces randomly. So that's just another example of a modifier. I'll do one more here. I'll bring in a cylinder. We'll scale this in Z. And oh yeah, so in the modifier tab, subdivision surface is down the bottom. This is this will basically subdivide every single polygon on the object by 4, split it into 4, and in doing so it'll also smooth out the object. Now that doesn't look quite very smooth right now, that's just because it's a messy object I've made. So in the subdivision surface we can switch up the subdivisions in the view and the render separately. I also want to switch on smoothing for the object. and simple. Right, so now I've got this really weird looking object. So I'm going to add another modifier, and it's going to be simple to form. So this is a way we can twist, bend, and stretch the object. So and the modifiers, they appear in a stack here. So I added that subdivision surface first, and now below that I've got the deform, very much like if you've got a guitar distortion and then you've got a reverb and stuff. It depends which order they go in. They'll have different outcomes. So with twist there, you've got an angle. I can twist that, and you can just about see. Twist that. So you can see we're getting a little twisting effect there. Could be handy for kind of rope and stuff. We've also got a bend, and this is going to bend it in an awkward angle now, just to be awkward. Taper is going to kind of make one side bigger and the other leave it, kind of shrink it down. So very handy. And then stretch is going to like squash and stretch our object, so we can make some creepy yeah, so that's kind of the idea behind modifiers. We'll hop into those further down the line. Right, I'm just going to do another quick reset on my scene and back into my properties editor. So, modifiers. After that, object data, we don't need to worry about that just now. Following that, we have a little sphere, kind of a shaded sphere. This is where we add materials and stuff like that to our object. We'll have a whole class on materials and cycles and so on, so worry not. So at the moment, it just comes with the default material. If we scroll down, we have a preview, and then we have all these options. Actually, I'll slide these closed. Now we can see a bit better. So we've got our material, and we've got a preview of that material. Then we've got diffuse. Diffuse is the color. No matter what you're doing in 3D, diffuse is always going to be the actual color. So you see we've got white there. If I click on that and we slide this around, we can start changing that to whatever color we want. And we can change the intensity of that color. So if we run all the way down, it's just going to go black. Specular is going to be the shininess of it. That's kind of, let me see. I'll bring in a better object, maybe it might be easier to see. UV sphere. Right, so now I just created this object, so it doesn't have a material applied. So I'm just going to click new. Now we've got material 001. So I can change that color to green. And the specular, we could turn that up. Now it's kind of hard to see it in the viewport. So I might just, yeah, I've just done a rendered view there just to kind of give you an idea. So you see that white little patch there, that's the, what have I done? That's the shininess of the object. And that's being affected by this light. So you see as I move this light around, we get real-time feedback in the viewport. So we've got like a shiny spot there. We can change the intensity then of the actual shininess. You'll see the little shiny sphere changing there, and the hardness of the object. We can also make it transparent, and we can control the shadows and stuff like that. But yeah, that's just a quick look at the materials there. Following that, we have the texture tab. So this is for bringing in our textures, wrapping them onto objects. When you bring in a texture into 3D, it's kind of like wrapping a Christmas present. I don't know if any of you guys are very good at it. I find it very difficult to do. If you try to wrap a present and make it look perfect, maybe you guys can do that. But if you are good at that, you'll probably be good at texturing in 3D. But again, we're gonna do some more of that later. Yeah, so that's the texture tab. Following that, we have the particles tab. So just gonna reset real quick. just going to delete this, and I'm going to bring in. Now I've just brought in just a flat object just to demonstrate the particles. So particles are basically all our effects. We can create fire, smoke, everything really, like any kind of a little tiny like dust, stuff like that, fog. Yeah, so generally particles, what they are is they're just like a tiny little picture which is always going to face the camera. This is the way it's been in video games for years now and stuff. So it's called a sprite, and it's just like a little picture. No matter where you go as the viewer or the player, this image is always going to face you. So then if we have thousands of these, we can give the illusion that there's fire because it's always going to be facing you. So particles, I'm just going to click new. Now we should get, yeah. So just to start off a particle system, you just have to select an object and create a new particle system. So what that's done there now, it's just kind of like rain, and these are all just little tiny little specks basically. I don't think they'll show up in the render. No. Let's just hit a render. Oh yeah. So that's the rendered view of what they look like. At the moment, they're just little images that are just like a gradient. They're white in the center, and then they just fade out to transparent on the edges. That's just the default kind of way that they appear. We'll probably be doing some kind of underwater bubble effects, and we're actually going to take in the Minecraft bubbles. Don't know if you've noticed them, but they're there. So we're going to have the Minecraft bubbles kind of floating about for whatever reason. So again, we can change the number of them. We can have 1,000, you can put 10,000, 10 million, but it will kill your computer. And we can control all of these particles with forces and physics and gravity and all that kind of stuff. Let's see if I have. I'm just going to slide down here and close these. Physics. No, I'll just leave it at that for now, yeah. So yeah, particles, we'll definitely be getting into those. And finally, this little tab. We're actually going to finish up now after this because it's nearly 3 o'clock already. So we got a late start, but we will continue this next week. I was kind of hoping to have gone through the entire interface, but we'll continue next week. So the last tab I'm going to show you here. I just slide this out. This is for physics and smoke simulations, liquid simulations, stuff like that. So if I just set up a real quick scene here, mesh plane. So I'm just going to add a floor. So when we want to turn objects into actual physical objects that affect simulations, we have to turn them into what's called a rigid body, which I've just done there. And active, passive. Great. So I'm going to select this this block up here, click rigid body, and that should be enough now. So if I hit play, Daniel, what do I have to do here to switch collision? Enable Atomer. Okay. Is that it? You better be right. Hey! Well done. So yeah, so we can make that a collision object. It's hard to remember everything in Blender, so yeah, so basically what we've just done now is just made this an actual physical object. If I rotate this a little bit just to make it land a bit better, press and go back. Now you see it actually bounces there. So wind this back again. 50. No, I just created some dupe. Oh, we lost one. Goodbye. Goodbye. So that's lost in 3D space for all eternity, and it's back. Hey. So yeah, we can have lots of fun with physics and whatnot and stuff. And that's really the last tab there on the properties editor. There is a billion things to know and whatnot, but as the course goes on, we're gonna be focusing on each little part by itself, and it will make much more sense. Hopefully the class was recorded now on my computer, I think, so I will upload this later tonight if you want to review it or whatever. But I mean, I really thought that we would have got onto the 3D view today because I wanted to talk about actually moving objects and stuff. But we will continue on with that next week. Just finishing up all the editors. Just as I said, you can grab them, slide them, squash them, do whatever you want with them. And yeah, so that's kind of it, guys. So if there's any questions or whatever, it's 10 to 3 now, so great. Everyone happy enough?